On this episode of the Haunted Objects Podcast.
You ever been so scared you dropped a baby?
From deep inside the mysterious archives of the Newkirk Museum of the Paranormal, it's the Haunted Objects Podcast.
Do you like it when the movies show the monster?
Sometimes I do. Sometimes I do. Sometimes I don't. I don't know. It depends. It depends on the monsters.
What's the criteria for showing the monster?
I feel like if it's a movie where in the version of it in my head is already really scary, then I don't want to see it in real life. But like an instance that I always think about, and I use it as like the perfect example, is the scene in Signs, the movie or the newsreel where you actually see the alien for the first time. It's so scary. Like it legitimately,
right.
I didn't not want to see it. I thought at the end of the movie, I didn't need to see that much of it.
Sure.
But the leg in the cornfield and like just that moment was like perfect.
Yeah.
Where that's like the best example of when you definitely want to see what it looks like.
What about not showing the monster?
I mean, all other horror movies, basically.
I think is it dependent on the budget, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Whether or not you see it?
Yeah. When you saw the Blair Witch Project for the first time, as a kid, you were like, I want to see the monster. Like you wanted to see it kind of. But now, over the years, I'm appreciative of the fact that we never get to see it because I think it makes the movie consistently that much more terrifying because my brain will always come up with a new version of what the Blair Witch actually looks like and what it is.
What about Christmas movies? You like Christmas movies?
I love Christmas movies.
What's your favorite Christmas movie?
Die Hard.
That was really fast.
And Gremlins.
Oh, that's a good one. I'm a Home Alone fan.
Home Alone is great.
I have to watch Home Alone every year. What about you, Connor?
A Muppet Christmas Carol.
Oh, that's nice.
It's one of the best ones. Charles Dickens' ghost stories are primo and original ghost stories.
Yeah.
That are objectively fantastic stories.
Sure.
So
today we're going to talk about one of the greatest Christmas stories ever. Some might say it's the greatest story ever told.
It is. You have monsters. You have Richard Gere. You have people dying at the end of the movie.
When I think about Christmas, I think about bridge disasters and giant monsters, giant winged monsters that terrorize an entire town.
Yes.
That's right. Today we're talking about the Mothman Prophecies, and the artifact that we have is a hell of a lot bigger than I thought it was when I bought it. It's one of the cars that fell off the bridge during the bridge disaster.
On a cool November night in 1966, 4 teenagers driving the back roads of West Virginia came face to face with a monster. The creature, part man and part bird, stood 7 feet tall, with enormous wings emerging from its back. Frightened beyond belief, the teens raced to the nearest town with the beast in tow, its red eyes glowing like embers in the night sky. The monster, dubbed Mothman, would terrorize the tight-knit town of Point Pleasant for the next year, with reporter John Keel in the heart of a mystery haunted by UFOs, men in black, and a talkative ultraterrestrial named Indrid Cold. Keel wrote about the case in his book, The Mothman Prophecies, which became a cult classic, resulting in a Hollywood film of the same name. This 1/6 scale vehicle was featured in the film's climactic scene, which horrified audiences around the world. Nearly 60 years later, we're left to ask, what exactly did John Keel uncover in Point Pleasant? And just where is the Mothman now?
I have to let everyone know, there's a lot of weird mail here at Weird HQ. We get crazy stuff in our post office box, but I'm also constantly acquiring interesting things that I find that I think are notable and worth preserving. So when I found out that there was a prop from one of my favorite movies, I think one of the best movies ever made about high strangeness, or at least one of the best attempts, I went, I need to own this. This has to go in the museum. And the listing just showed this little model car, And I thought, oh, it's from the bridge collapse scene. Of course, they didn't collapse a real bridge. They had to have a model. So I bought it. It's a lot bigger. This thing is like 4 feet long. It's like 3.5 feet.
I definitely did not expect it to be this size. And it's heavy too. It's like a heavy, gigantic car.
Well, it has, like, this is the thing. It was remote control. So it has remote control wheels. There was a battery that went inside of it. Like, the headlights lit up. It's very accurate. So it had to be big. And also the bridge was super huge.
Listen, when you said it was going to be a small car from the model, I expected it to be like this big. And this here's the thing though. You also expected it to be like this big.
I did.
So when this friggin' giant hoss arrives at the house in a humongous box and it weighs like 50 pounds, I was a little shocked. I was a little bit surprised.
It's definitely hard to display.
It's huge. It's gigantic. I mean, it's very cool.
We're sitting here looking at it, and it has to be spread across both of our desks because it won't fit on the normal object stand.
It is a very cool piece of history, and that it's also a very cool piece of like high strangeness actually managing to climb out of books.
Yes.
And convince people with a lot of money that there should be a movie based around its existence in the world, which is an incredibly rare thing. And I feel like also the reason why there has never been another High Strangeness movie since. Do you know what I mean?
We're going to talk a little bit about the journey to Mothman making it to the big screen.
Yes.
But first, we need to catch everybody up on what Mothman is if you're living under a rock.
Yes.
If you have no idea what the Mothman is, I don't know how you're listening to this podcast. There was a town in West Virginia, Point Pleasant, where most of this stuff took place. It involved everything from UFO sightings to Men in Black sightings to literal prophecies of disaster, and then, of course, sightings of the titular Mothman. I think by the time that the sightings were over, there were over 100 sightings during the flap, which lasted a little over a year. On November 2nd in 1966, Indrid Cold was first seen. That was when Woody Derenberger was driving along a highway, and he sees a craft come down and land on the highway next to him, and a man stands out and begins to telepathically speak to him, saying, "Don't be afraid. My name is Indrid Cold. I come from a place much weaker than yours," and proceeds to befriend this traveling salesman.
Indrid is kind of like the rock star of the Mothman moment. Like, Indrid is so cool. Indrid has a cool name.
Yeah.
Everything. I always think of Indrid as this like standout cool guy.
There is one really funny anecdote that I want to make sure we talk about. Dana already knows.
That's all you had to say.
So when we were shooting season 2 of Hellier, we're trying to find Indrid Cold's house, which is
That's such a good sentence.
It's weird. I understand how strange that is.
Yeah, we were
for real, and we were using clues that were in the book The Secret Cipher of the UFOnauts by Alan Greenfield, and Carl finds the location where Indrid Cold's house once stood, where he once lived, at least according to this guy Terry in the back of Alan Greenfield's book. While we were there, we had to go and see the exact spot where Woodrow Derenberger met Indrid Cold, where he came out of the craft. We sat there. We stood in his footsteps. And as we're doing this, Connor tells us, hey, Woodrow Derenberger's daughter is still around. She's over in Parkersburg, West Virginia. We should see if she wants to talk to us because she claims to have met Indrid Cold. So we went and we met Tanya Derenberger. We sat down and interviewed her. Great interview. Lots of really interesting details about meeting this ultraterrestrial and how he basically became a family friend. And what did she tell us about John Keel and her?
She said that John Keel called her before the movie came out and warned her that her father was not depicted well and that she might not enjoy the movie. And then he apparently bought her like 2 tickets to go see it.
That's very nice of him.
Which is nice of him.
It's also very on brand for John Keel to be talking shit about something.
That's true.
He was like, "Ugh, just so you know.
This was a stinker.
He was sort of depicted as a bit of a nutcase. And frankly, he wasn't that bad.
No, I feel like it's kind of unfair because I think you're supposed to think that he's a little out there at the beginning, and then you start realizing, no, this is a guy who's really going through something. Like, he's I think reacting relatively fairly to the experience, but he's nothing like Woody Derenberger. Like, it's a very different character.
Very different depiction.
And what did they change his name to?
Oh, what was it?
Oh, Gordon
Smallwood.
Yeah,
I'd be mad.
Smallwood.
I mean, that feels intentional. I gotta say.
Wait, what's my fake name?
Smallwood.
Smallwood.
Oh,
couldn't it have been Largewood?
Yeah, why wasn't it? Gordon Largewood.
Couldn't it have been Engorged Wood?
Gorged Wood.
Gordon Engorged Wood.
Well, the funniest thing to me is we got to meet Tanya Derenberger, which was amazing. It was great. We were literally meeting someone who's connected to one of the most famous high strangeness cases in the world.
She's in the presence of Indrid Cold.
She said Indrid Cold used to make refrigerator boxes with them, and they would ride around in refrigerator box spaceships. She knew Indrid. She claims Indrid still visits her sometimes.
Tanya's great.
She's great.
She's a nice young woman.
So in season 2, Connor describes Tanya Derenberger as a sweet old lady.
Yeah.
And after season 2 came out, we got messages from Tanya about what a jerk Connor was and how she wasn't old.
Connor is embodying John Keel in that moment and making a generalization about a woman.
That's my legacy now. That's my connection to the Derenbergers.
Is you offended Tanya Derenberger?
Tanya hates me.
I'm not kidding. I'm not kidding. She still makes passive aggressive comments about it on her Facebook page.
You do your thing, Tanya Derenberger.
It is. I mean, I love Tanya. She is so sweet, but that is so funny to me.
It's very funny.
I'm glad it's funny to you. Because I love Indrid Cold in that whole story. And now when Tanya Derenberger, who also met Indrid Cold, thinks about me, she's like, oh, that freaking guy.
Called me old.
Called me old in front of 1 million people, whatever, how many match this? And it's like, it was just a turn of phrase.
Connor, this is a perfect opportunity to apologize to Tanya.
Tanya, I'm sorry. You're very nice. And thank you for sharing your story with us. It's fascinating. We'll be around.
You're very young.
You're very young. That turn of phrase just came out of my mouth. I was nervous. I was excited by your celebrity. And I just had a moment of slippage. And I apologize.
Moment of slippage. I think that should be a season 3 title card. Moment of slippage.
Moment of slippage.
Oh,
Ew.
boy. Time slippage, maybe.
Yeah, time. What is your time slippage?
Oh, boy.
That's how the Derenbergers remember me now.
It
and
is.
possibly the Colds.
That's my legacy.
And the Colds.
Indrid, Kimmy, Carl, and Connor.
Tanya said she watched Hellier with Indrid Cold.
I love that idea.
I've heard that there were critiques. There were things that we didn't get right about.
Well, listen, Indrid, please. I think that you are the coolest ultra-terrestrial in the entire world, and I would love to meet you.
Listen, last we knew you were dead.
Yeah, that's true.
We were told that you were dead and you died in a fiery spaceship crash while being chased by humanoids. We thought you were gone. Glad to hear that you've survived, apparently. Please come see us. We'll show you season 3.
Yeah. Also, you can talk through the Frank's box.
Oh, that's true.
Yeah, you could always we could always do the Estes method.
Why the haven't we done this yet?
I don't know why. It just dawned on me literally right as I was saying it.
We've
never attempted to try to talk to Indrid Cold.
There we go. That's our experiment this month.
Yeah. I just want I'm all I'm saying is putting it out there. Indrid, you know where we are.
You know where we are. We're easy to find.
Or, it could be Carl Ardo.
Call us and talk to us about chapstick.
We'll
Yeah.
take Carl Ardo.
We'll take Carl Ardo.
We'll take Demo.
That's
Demo
true. Demo Hassan.
Yeah. We got it. We'll take anybody at this point.
It's true. If you're an ultra-terrestrial and you're watching this, hit us up. Let's talk. We promise we won't call you old.
Write the keyword down in the comments.
Are you in possession of a haunted object? An antique spiritualist tool? Wreckage from a crashed UFO? The Newkirk Museum of the Paranormal wants to add it to their archives. Whether your strange item is causing you paranormal problems or is simply a supernaturally significant relic worthy of curation, we want to hear from you. For more information on our acquisition process, visit paramuseum.com.
People have tried really hard to make Indrid Cold scary.
Yeah, they always try to.
They've really exaggerated that he
man.
has a big grin, but the truth is he was just this like super good-looking, nice
Yeah.
alien that for some reason wanted to be friends with Woody Derenberger.
Yeah, he was just like this complete unit that just like walks out of a friggin' spacecraft on the highway, like saunters up to Woody Derenberger's car and is just like, "Don't be afraid of me. Why are you afraid?"
10 days after this happened, and that happened about 70 miles away from Point Pleasant.
Yes.
So this is really the beginning of where the Mothman Prophecies starts. 10 days after that, there's a group of grave diggers who see a large brown man with wings flying over top of them in Clenendon, West Virginia. Clenendon.
Which is a name for a place.
I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly.
Sorry,
Someone
people.
will
Shout out Clenendon.
shout out Clenendon, West Virginia. Grave diggers.
Yeah.
Shout out.
Shout out Gravediggers.
So they see this guy glide above them, and that is, I think, technically the first example of the Mothman.
Yes.
On November 15th, 3 days later, after the gravediggers see this thing, there's a guy who's watching television, his dog's on his porch, and Mothman takes his dog.
Yes. So the dog goes bolting off into the darkness. And I mean, like, here's the thing, Connor, you're a dog dad. Would you not chase your dog and follow your dog, even if you were like sensing, terrifyingness? I would literally chase my dog. I'd be like, there's no way.
Oh,
Like,
yeah. I'd literally chase my dog and go instead of my dog, probably. I'd find a way to hold him back.
Yeah. You would chase
Yeah.
your dog and then you would fight Mothman
I would fist fight Mothman.
just to save George.
Listen,
Yeah, I would kill Mothman for sure. I would find a way.
I just pictured
fighting Mothman.
beating Mothman with a rock.
There's a thought that like maybe he's saving these dogs from bad
I
people,
hope so.
and I hope that that's the truth. But there's also a lot of dead dogs in the Mothman Prophecies.
There's a lot of dead
Exactly.
dogs around high strangeness in
So-
general.
It's awful. And this is sort of the first instance in this story that takes place over the course of a year where and then has just kind of continued on where dogs seem to be the victim of this something weird happening.
Right.
And they're always sort of
Like the first
center
thing to
of it.
go.
Yeah.
The canaries, yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And like you said the other day, we were talking about this, and Connor said it's almost like they represent like innocence. Like there's something about it that's so sinister and malevolent to me that like a dog would be murdered or something. Dead dogs would be, a moment that happens at the beginning of a strange high strangeness flap seems very off-putting to me.
You think you could take Mothman in a fight?
If the dog was on the line,
Yeah.
I think I'd be filled with enough
Yeah. You'd
hatred
yes.
and adrenaline.
You'd be like those moms who can like lift a car up.
Yeah.
Like that your adrenaline would kick in and you'd just be like, bam, bam.
I think you'd have to go for the eyes.
Oh,
Just pop them big red eyes out.
Like a couple of grapes.
Yeah. Oh my. It's a side of you I've not seen before, Connor.
Oh my God. All right.
Well, 90 minutes or so after Mothman allegedly steals this guy's dog is what most people know as the Mothman story begins.
Yes.
Teenagers ostensibly making out at the old TNT domes. They see this giant red-eyed creature that follows them all the way back to town.
Mm-hmm.
It shoots up in the air and it flies over top of their car, and they're going super fast.
I cannot help it. Every time I read the description for how Mothman flies, I just picture like someone just standing there going like this and like a green screen sky in the background.
I mean, that's kind of how it's described.
I literally envision it every single time that way. Mothman's just like, and just the sky is going by.
One of the weirder details is there's not a whole lot of reports where Mothman's flapping his wings.
That's, I think, even weirder.
Right?
Like, why are the wings there? What are they for?
It's possible that Mothman's a UFO. Just appearing in a really weird way.
Yeah.
But in addition, like, it doesn't even make sense if you have somebody who's between 6 and 7 feet tall and they're built, the wing size will
be
just
massive.
be gargantuan.
Yeah.
Like the physics of it don't really make sense unless it's like 20-foot wingspan. You know, there's got to be a really interesting mathematical formula for that somebody can do.
Another argument that Mothman is not a cryptid.
Yeah.
Cryptids are animals.
Yes. Undiscovered animals.
Yes.
So I always really find the description of Mothman very interesting and weird, almost sort of similar in a way, the way that I think about the Flatwoods Monster, where it's like Mothman was never described with a neck. So there's almost like the Batman cowl, kind of, like then just straight down to the shoulders. A very muscular body.
Show me the dogs. Where are the dogs?
Where are dogs?
I thought you were going to...
I was trying to think of another Batman.
You don't know any of your Batman. Ironically, it is Batman that caused the name Mothman to stick. They thought it would be catchy. They played the news media. I think it was the AP played off of this report because the day after the kids saw Mothman at the TNT domes, there was actually a press junket where they were talking about this.
They did not waste any time at all. Isn't that weird? Kind of like when you think about it, they did it like the next day. They didn't like take into consider like maybe these kids are full of shit.
Well, nobody took it seriously. It was Mary Heyer, who was one of the local reporters, who actually wrote the first stories about these reports, and they came across the AP wire, and some of the bigger news agencies went, "This is weird." Yeah, and then they dubbed the entity the Mothman, based on Batman, and it just went crazy. It was equivalent to a viral. It was a viral meme, basically. It was everywhere. Everyone wanted to know about Mothman.
The headline, Connor told me the headline earlier, and it was something like Teen See Man, Bird, something?
Yeah.
But yeah, you're right. Batman would have been very popular on television at the time. Totally makes sense.
The sighting that everybody knows about is the Scarberry sighting. Yes. It was Roger and Linda Scarberry. They were out by the TNT domes. There's a lot of different stories about what they were doing out there. I mean, come on. It's kids at night out by the abandoned TNT domes. Lovers' lanes are usually a place where high strangeness tends to occur. That's something that we know because of John Keel. They see a menacing creature, 7 feet tall, extremely muscular. The detail that they... Why are you laughing?
What would you do if you saw
I mean,
that?
shit my pants.
If you saw a giant, muscular, feathered man with giant red eyes, no neck.
Well, this is the other detail that's really weird. They talk about how it ran clumsily. It was not It was not flying. This thing was running at them. And I think one of the ways that it is described in another book is like a clumsy or crippled chicken.
Oh,
like a penguin?
Yeah, kind of like waddling almost, but really fast.
Or something that was just learning how to use its legs.
Oh, God, you had to say that.
You know what
That's
I mean? Like,
creepy.
It makes me think of like a newborn animal, like wobbly and kind of.
Maybe it was newborn.
But that's what I mean. Like, what if it popped out of a rift or a dimensional portal or something, and it was like, I have a physical body and I need to.
Maybe.
That's creepy. That's a creepy detail because the first thing when you read that, I initially think of like the guy in Terminator 2 who's like.
Oh yeah.
But no, if it's clumsy, that means it's like falling and trying to like a deer, like a baby deer trying to get its legs to work properly.
Well, it was running after them. It then shot up in the air, flew after them. Linda Scarberry said that she had seen a dead dog on the side of the road as they were going as fast as they could away from the scene. When they came back, it was gone.
Yeah.
And this was the story that broke in the newspaper that really announced Mothman to the world.
Yeah. So this thing essentially followed them back to town. It flew like right above their car, and it followed them all the way back.
In that 13-month period from the beginning, the very first instances of people seeing the Mothman,
Yeah.
there were over 100 confirmed sightings of this thing.
Yeah.
Some of them more believable than others, but witness reports were flying in for this year.
No pun intended.
One of my favorites is the creature the first time it was sighted in the daylight.
Yeah, which is so funny. The idea of that is so funny to me.
This guy, Tom Urey, he was driving to Clarksburg on Highway 62. It's about 8 miles north of Point Pleasant. And he saw the Mothman rise up from a field like a helicopter and flew 70 miles an hour over top of his car towards the TNT domes.
See, that's so weird, and that also now makes me think of what Connor said. Is it a plane? Is Mothman like a drone? Do you know what I mean?
But there were no drones back then. This is the 60s.
I'm saying, is Mothman like some sort of bizarre extraterrestrial drone that came down and just zooms around and follows people's cars?
Yeah.
Have you ever seen those videos of video game glitches where the guy's arms are straight out in a T-pose and they just go whoop and they zip straight up into the air?
That's exactly it. Like the idea of this strange being, not having, kind of being clumsy sort of, is hilarious because it's like Mothman's like trying to figure out how to do things. But that's also very creepy, and the idea of it is funny and terrifying at the same time.
Yeah.
That you might see Mothman, and then Mothman just floats up into the air like a glitching computer. You know what I mean? It's the creepiest, weirdest description of this strange beast.
It seems bizarre, but that's how a lot of these entities are described in all kinds of sightings, depending on whether it's a goblin, that's like the Kentucky Goblins in 55, they floated.
Yeah.
They didn't move on their legs, really. They just sort of floated as they were shot out of trees. Fairies are said to float through the air as if they're
fly.
weightless. Ghosts, they just sort of don't make noise. They just sort of hover. There's all kinds of weird details about these things, not really using their extremities to move.
Yeah.
You ever been so scared you dropped a baby?
That was a segue.
Because Mary was in the day of the press conference.
Yeah, I think she fell on it too.
November
laid down on top of it.
November 16th, all the townsfolk gather and they go out to the Mothman TNT Domes area, War of the Worlds style, trying to find this thing.
Yeah.
The irony is, it was in town.
Yeah. Mothman was like, psych.
So it was hanging out in town. The Mary saw it in a field and was so scared she dropped her baby.
And then fell on, and then laid on top of it.
Fell down on top.
Which is, again, we're laughing, but think about all the stories of the people getting under hypnotic stare,
right,
and not being able to move their bodies and feeling frozen in place. Maybe she was so frightened that she saw something her brain could not compute, and she literally just left her body.
Yeah.
And then landed on a small child.
Landed on a baby.
Yeah. Hopefully that baby's okay. Shout out to that baby.
Maybe that was the perfect excuse for dropping your baby.
Oh, don't say that.
I'm just going to use, everybody has to drop a baby once, right?
Baby, are you still out there?
Write us and let us know what it was like.
We want to meet you, baby.
Being dropped by your mother because of the Mothman.
Is Mothman your first memory?
Are you okay?
Baby, we care about you.
My brother's best friend has this amazing story that his dad dropped him when he was an infant while he was going down the stairs. And he slipped cartoon style on a banana peel. And apparently it was his first child. He was a new dad, and he was walking. He was like, whoa.
That's the worst.
Did he blame it on Mothman?
It's always that Drew's kind of dumb, and it's well, his dad had a tough time, and he's a good guy.
It was probably just like Greg said. It was probably just Mothman.
Just Mothman. Listen, babies are resilient. Babies are fine. They
made
bounce.
out of rubber.
They're made to withstand.
They're like little rubber balls. They're
for
fine.
sure.
They don't have any real bones.
It's
They're
the
all-
old people falling you got to be worried about.
Yeah, you don't want to fall on an old person, lay down on them for a little while, because that's not going to be good.
That's not good.
No.
Just blame it on Mothman if it happens.
Yeah.
You know what? I think we're starting to see something happen here. We're starting to see people blame tragedies on the Mothman.
Yeah, like what exactly? This
It all starts with a baby and a dog.
This is another Jody scenario.
It is.
Where we have this amazing magical creature from another dimension, and we're blaming this creature for all of our human faults.
John Keel would call it a devil theory.
John Keel would call it that.
He would.
He definitely
There are
would.
plenty of devil theories. Mothman's just one of them. Just blame all the societal ills on Mothman.
Yes.
This guy loses his family dog on like a hunting trip, and he goes back to the kids, and they're like, "Where's Bandit, Daddy?" And he's like, "There was a big old monster."
Oh my God, Mothman just became like the perfect excuse for every person in Point
Mothman
Pleasant.
ate my homework
They were like, "No, it's Mothman."
and my dog.
And I'm not cheating on my wife at all at night. I was with Mothman. I was chasing Mothman.
No, that's Indrid Cold.
Oh, no.
We don't know anything for sure.
No.
Listen,
That's part of the lore, though.
part
is
of
it
the
not?
lore. Well, one of the other cool sightings is there's a couple that sees Mothman pacing on their front porch.
That is scary.
It's crazy.
What is he doing?
Who
What
knows?
is he doing in this town?
That is what the Mothman Prophecy is about.
But Mothman, see, the other thing is Mothman also seems to be a little bit stressed out.
Yeah, maybe.
Like Mothman is just, I just imagine Mothman as being like, I don't like, what am I'm going to fly around. There's a car, like getting distracted, flying around cars,
Yeah.
just wandering, standing in a field, looking at people. Like, what is Mothman doing?
That's the question. That's the burning question.
What would scare you more? Mothman standing in a field during the day,
Sure.
Mothman flying above your car,
Yeah.
or Mothman, what was the other one that Mothman did?
I don't know, running at you like a crippled chicken.
Running at you.
I mean, that's the scariest one to me.
I feel like the Mothman just standing in a field is the creepiest thing. I don't know why. It just creeps me out so much.
I mean, maybe, but being attacked, like being run at by this thing that can't really run, and it's got
I don't know.
giant legs. I just keep thinking about the legs. They're big and muscular legs, not like a bird's or a moth's. They're fucking big old chonkers.
Big old thick.
Trunks.
Mothman's
Trunks.
thick. I mean, listen,
Yeah.
if you go to Point Pleasant and you see the Mothman statue, he has got a rump.
He's got a good old donk.
He does.
Does your statue capture
No,
it?
it's got the word. Look at it. This does not do justice to the Mothman's booty. You can't even really see
No,
it.
it doesn't.
Listen, if you follow the Object Pod Instagram account, you'll see a Mothman butt like every week because it's my go-to thing that I post in the stories.
Yeah, that's good plug. Follow our social media accounts.
Yeah.
Follow Objects Pod on Twitter,
Yeah.
Objects Pod on Instagram, and Objects Pod on TikTok. We even have a TikTok.
TikTok.
Ugh.
No, it's great.
Anyway, so that's most of the more interesting sightings of the Mothman.
Yes.
Again, there's over 100 of these things.
Yeah.
John Keel comes to town. He's trying to investigate what's going on here. He's messed with the men in black.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of strange stuff. UFO sightings, high strangeness out the wazoo.
Mm-hmm.
Really, really strange flap. It lasts for over a year, 13 months, then the bridge collapses. So naturally, there's a lot of blame placed on Mothman for what happens.
Yes.
It was a terrible tragedy. Again, it's the reason that we have certain inspections on bridges all over the country now. It's because of what happened in Point Pleasant. It was a big, big deal. 44 people died. They only recovered 42 of the bodies.
I think the thing you have to consider too is this happened in an incredibly small community. So
Yes.
every family in this community was affected by this, whether it was like someone in your family or your neighbor's family. Like it is a very, very small group of people. So to have 44 people pass in one day in such a traumatic and like terrible, terrible way, the community was incredibly impacted by this. Like it was just a terrible, terrible thing to happen.
1975, John Keel releases the book, The Mothman Prophecies. The book is crazy.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people have seen the film. Not a lot of people have read the book. It's a book that I think anyone who's into the paranormal should absolutely read.
Absolutely.
Probably one of the more accessible of John Keel's books right out the gate.
Yes.
John Keel was very, very data-driven.
Yes.
So his books they can be a slog in certain points, but he has a way of writing about it that really makes a lot of different pieces fit together.
Sure, you just have to go on the journey. You have to trust that you're going somewhere, and you will absolutely get somewhere.
So the Mothman Prophecies book is what popularized this account after all the news had gone away, because there really wasn't anything that happened in Point Pleasant relating to any of this high strangeness. It just sort of ceased when the bridge collapsed.
Yeah.
So John Keel writes this definitive account of what happened in Point Pleasant during this 13-month flap. That comes out in 1975. What most people don't realize is there was a book that was written 5 years earlier that details this from a slightly different perspective. And it was written by Gray Barker. It's called The Silver Bridge. It is, I have a copy of it here. If you're watching the video podcast, you can see it. Gray Barker put this out on his own imprint, Saucerian Books. He was a very well-known UFO researcher and writer. He was a local boy. He was from West Virginia. That meant he was one of the first people on the scene.
Yeah. He was there a month before John Keel even made it into Point Pleasant.
He claims that the only reason John Keel was there is because he told him about it. Gray Barker was on the scene first for a lot of things. One of his writers for Saucerian was one of the first people on the scene to investigate the Hopkinsville Goblin case in 1955. He was the first person on the scene to investigate the Flatwoods Monster. There's a lot of stuff that Gray Barker was involved in that most people don't really talk about much anymore. And I think it's because he has a reputation of being a trickster. His book is really, really interesting if you already know the narrative laid out in John Keel's book. The Silver Bridge is far more poetic is probably the word. It's got all the same people in it. He interviews all the same witnesses that John Keel interviews. There's all the same events that are happening in it. But because he's local, it seems that he had an easier time giving you insight into these people's lives.
Sure, it paints more of like an everyday picture of who these people were, where you kind of lose a lot of that detail in Mothman Prophecies. It's nice because it gives you a moment to like get to know who some of these people are. And I think in a lot of ways, it actually lends a lot of credibility to their stories.
Sure.
Which you kind of miss out on in Mothman Prophecies a bit.
The other really weird thing about Silver Bridge is there is every few chapters, there's a chapter that focuses on the ultraterrestrials.
Yeah.
From the ultraterrestrials' perspective.
It's very weird.
It is so strange.
Yeah.
It is like the Men in Black as they're trying to be human.
Yeah, trying to figure out how to be human beings.
There's a whole section in the later half of the book where there's a what was the Men in Black's name? Was it Agar?
Yeah, it was something like that.
I think it was
Egar. Was it Egar?
I think it was something like Agar. And it's very much him like having this like strange relationship with a little boy who's not afraid of him. And it feels very much like a Frankenstein kind of thing.
Sure.
And it's just written so interestingly. It really does give you a whole different perspective on the Mothman, whereas Keel's stuff is, again, very data-driven.
Yeah, it's very literal.
He's just like, he's concerned with the facts of the case.
Yeah.
Gray Barker is concerned with telling a good story.
Yeah, and there's a lot of humanity in the Silver Bridge. There's a lot of getting to know some of these people and understanding their motivations and sort of giving them a bit more of an identity as opposed to just being statistic. I think my like ideal world would be if Gray and John had written a book together.
Oh, it would have been perfect.
It would have been like the perfect thing because you would have had someone who's very good at telling a story and someone who's very good at finding the humanity in a situation, and then someone who's incredibly hyper-fixated on facts and data, and mash those two things together and you'd get this like perfect balance. I think they would have worked really well together if they had been investigating together.
If the studio had optioned the Silver Bridge,
yeah,
we would have had a much different movie.
For sure.
I think it probably would have done better at the box office, personally.
I think that, you know what's funny is I feel like if they had optioned it, we may not have had the same amount of high strangeness that actually manages to make its way into the Mothman Prophecies movie.
Right.
But there would be more of a sense of a story happening. You know what I mean? Like, I almost feel like it could have been like a kid's movie, like an E.T. or something. You know what I mean? Like, it would be different. It would be a very different movie.
Our friend Alan Greenfield, who people will know from Hellier.
Legendary Alan Greenfield.
Alan Greenfield started as a ufologist and became a ritual magician who was a ufologist. Alan Greenfield wrote in 1970 the foreword to Silver Bridge.
Yeah, January 1970.
Connor, when you and I and Carl went down to interview Alan Greenfield for season 2, we took him out to dinner beforehand, and he knew we were trying to butter him up, but we were scared of him.
He's a scary guy.
Everything we'd seen about him was scary. Like, we thought, oh, he's going to be a man in black. He's a ritual magician who's a ufologist. He wrote Secret Cipher of the Ufonauts. It's got, the interview with Terry Wrist in it. We thought he was going to be this like super mysterious man in black figure. No, he shows up in a Hawaiian shirt. He's very goofy.
He's
and
very
affable.
subversive.
Very, very funny. Lovely guy.
Remember we went to a Indian restaurant and there was a lot of tension between the two staff members.
Yes, there was.
And that was my moment of humanity with shared humanity with Alan Greenfield, where we looked across the table at each other while these two like brothers who were working at this Indian restaurant were like fighting with each other, and we were both like, "Oh, why?"
I think they were fighting over Alan's Coke.
Yeah, they couldn't remember if he said Diet Coke or regular Coke.
Yeah.
They didn't want to get it wrong.
Alan
and then
was...
he brought it out on a platter.
Oh, that's right. He
literally
did.
The guy brings out a single can of Diet Coke on a platter.
Maybe he knew.
Served it to him.
Maybe he recognized Alan Greenfield and was like, I don't want to mess this up because he is a legendary ritual magician, and I don't know what could happen if I don't get this right.
Maybe. Alan was really chatty. He right out the gate started telling us stories about the old days of ufology, because Alan was around when all this stuff was going on. And one of the things that Alan said is, he said, "Have you read The Silver Bridge?" And I said, no, I wasn't even really aware of it. He said, you should read The Silver Bridge once you've read Mothman Prophecies, because Keel's stuff is great for understanding the data, but Gray Barker understands the poetry of high strangeness.
Yeah.
And he said he thinks it's the better book. And so that's part of the reason we even know to have read it.
I mean, that's the funny thing, too, is because when we think of Point Pleasant and when we think of the Mothman flap, all anyone ever thinks about is Mothman Prophecies. It's weird to even think, oh, wait, there was another book that was written 5 years before Mothman Prophecies was written that was all about the same exact thing by another prominent member of the UFO community.
Yeah.
It was such a big thing, and it's such a cultural thing in the UFO world and the high strangeness world and paranormal world just in general, that we often forget that Gray had a book written about the very same thing.
I think the best way to look at it is, if John Keel was like the mainstream rock star, Gray Barker was like the indie garage band.
Yes.
Because this came out on Saturday Review Press. So, Mothman Prophecies was out on a big legit publishing house, whereas Gray Barker's Silver Bridge was self-published.
Yeah, and I mean, Gray even mentions it in The Silver Bridge. He talks about how when John Keel came into town, he was kind of, he had a big beard that was very distinct, and he had a character, he had a kind
he was a city slicker.
He had a presence to him, and he also mentions that John had a bunch of great, articles under his belt for,
he wrote for Playboy.
For Playboy, for a handful of really big publications. He had already proven himself as a legitimate journalist. So it's an interesting thing to kind of see the difference between these two very different personalities that are in the same space covering the same content.
And they knew each other. I mean, I think they got along, although that might not have been the case in 1975 when Mothman Prophecies comes out. And John Keel claims that Gray Barker's book was a celestial fantasy.
Fairy tale.
Oh, fairy tale. A celestial fairy tale.
It says it right at the end of the book, too. I just finished Mothman for like the fifth time today, and I was like, oh, that's right. He gave Gray a little bit of shade at the end.
He was good at that.
Yeah, I was gonna say John Keel is the king of dropping some shade. Like he's first of all, his descriptions of women are atrocious. I think it's almost like a meme at this point in time. Like he'll always physically describe how attractive he found any woman, even ones that he respects. He's like, she's a little bit.
Well, what
dumpy.
did he say about Mary Hire?
Yeah.
He called her like a heavy-set woman or something.
Like, you didn't need to say that. We're good. You don't need to give.
Yeah.
But my point being, he also he calls people who believed in UFO cultists.
He hated UFOs.
He loved crackpots.
He
did.
Crackpots. He does often refer to other people's writing abilities as like hack.
He does.
Like he's always taking shots at people when he can. I think celestial fairy tale is a lovely description for something.
Sure.
So
that's not how he meant it, though.
I know, but I choose to see it as a lovely
It certainly
thing.
doesn't look like one, though, because if you hold both those up, I mean, look, one looks like a badass monster book, and the other looks like an architecture manual.
I think you're looking at one of the reasons why one of these books definitely got a lot more attention than the other. Because when you, like you said, when you have a book that looks like architecture, stereo instructions, and then the other book that has a cool title and a cool name,
right?
People are definitely going to lean towards the one with a monster on the front of it.
For sure. It's definitely, there was better marketing on John Keel's
Absolutely.
behalf. And, I think it's hard because I think that if I'm looking to be entertained, I would choose The Silver Bridge.
Yeah.
If I'm looking to investigate,
Yes.
I would choose Mothman Prophecies.
Sure.
And it's so data-driven, in fact, that there was a whole other book that John Keel wrote called The Eighth Tower, which is all the stuff that was cut out of Mothman Prophecies and expanded upon. And that one is really weird.
If the Mothman Prophecies is too heavy data content for you, The Eighth Tower is going to suck the life out of you because it is a long slog. The thing that's really interesting is I think you're absolutely right. Mothman Prophecies is a book that can be used for research. Mm-hmm. It is a book that can be used to for your own investigation and your own theories. And then The Silver Bridge is something that almost fills it all in with texture.
Sets the vibe.
Yeah, it gives you texture. And like you said, it gives you a vibe. It sets the tone for everything, which is perfect. And they sort of work well together.
Yeah. So anyway, indie, you got your indie guy and you got your big published guy.
Yeah.
And of course, they choose to make the movie based on the Mothman Prophecies.
Yes.
I do not envy Richard Hatem.
Yes.
Richard Hatem was the screenwriter for the Mothman Prophecies. Did an excellent job. Mm-hmm. But just imagine trying to take this book and make a mainstream film out of it.
I still cannot believe that anybody gave this thing the green light. Like, it is
nuts.
Wild.
Hats off to Richard Hatem for this Herculean task of taking one of the best books about high strangeness and trying to make it palatable for mainstream audiences.
Yes.
Could not have been easy.
Yeah, and I also hats off for doing that, but also kind of staying true to the book itself.
Sure.
Because it is a weird movie. It's still weird, but it's it doesn't necessarily take us too far off the beaten path.
Sure. It had a lot of problems in production. We watched one of the bonus features on the old DVD the other night, and there's a really great almost a video diary. It comes in two parts: before, like pre-production, and then the end of production. And in it, it's just Mark Pellington the director talking to the camera about the things that he's nervous about. He's nervous about it being a commercial failure, even though he thinks it'll be it won't be an artistic failure. You can tell that the vibe on set was probably not great.
Yeah, they had like weeks of night shoots. It was cold. It seemed like morale was kind of low. They had lost $2 million off their budget like days before they started shooting.
Oh, there's a scene where Mark Pellington is kicking a door in because he just found out that they lost that money, which I think was probably supposed to be used for special effects.
Yes.
Which is maybe that's why the UFOs aren't in it. Maybe that's why there's not
It's
more
true.
Mothman.
Yeah.
You can, and it's like sphincter tighteningly awkward to watch it because they're very, very honest about what a miserable experience they were having.
Yeah, the whole thing has that vibe where like you walk into a room and two people were just having an argument. You just sort of feel that like the whole of principle of photography was probably pretty stressful for everybody involved.
Doesn't sound like it was a fun movie to make.
No, it kind of like oddly has a depressed vibe. Like the whole movie has like it kind of saturated the movie itself. It's got like a weird kind of depression energy to it.
What would you rate the movie out of 10 if you were solely IMDb?
I mean,
I don't want to.
it's hard because
Yeah.
I know what my personal review is. I think my personal review is a solid 7, 7.5.
Yeah, I would say 7, 7.5. That's fair.
Because, there's stuff that I wanted out of it that I didn't get. I don't need, the idea that John Keel worked at the Washington Post is hilarious
Or
to
had
me. Or had a wife.
Yeah, we didn't need any.
The guy was not that kind of guy.
No.
But I get why they did it. I would say 7, 7.5.
Yeah, but here's the better way to do it. How would you rate the scenes of high strangeness?
Oh, they're the
Because I
best.
think that's how you need to rate this movie. Not necessarily as a whole, but like, the chapstick scene with Indrid Cold on the phone is truly one of the creepiest, scariest, most like terrifying scenes ever. And it's a perfectly depicted high strangeness. It's so scary.
What you doing over there, Connor?
Nothing.
He's over there putting his chapstick on.
Chapstick. So you have this scene where the John Keel character picks up the phone and who's supposed to be Woody Derenberger says, Indrid's here with me right now. Connie goes to the house right away. And when she gets there, he's waking up from a nap. So it's that perfect example of so many of those weird, creepy things that we get in the Mothman Prophecies where like people are phoning you and there are doppelgangers hanging around and like, people are mimicking your voice on the phone. There's so much of that creepiness. And I think that scene does a really great job of encapsulating that.
They managed to sneak in Indrid Cold's catchphrase, "I'll see you in time."
Yes.
A lot of weird time stuff with Indrid Cold in the actual case. They did a really, really good job with a lot of the high strangeness.
Do you want to talk about that phrase?
Oh, see you in time?
Yeah.
There's this really strange thing that happens in John Keel's books where the entities, the ultraterrestrials, are obsessed with the idea of time cycles. One of the things that they always ask when they're either talking to him on the phone, being channeled through someone, even in letters, because John Keel got letters from ultraterrestrials.
Yeah.
He was in contact with these beings a lot. They're always asking, what is your time cycle? Something he's not quite sure how to answer. We do a lot of experiments, particularly post season 2 of Hellier, where we're trying to channel ultraterrestrials, or I should say you are. Dana is usually the one who gets the task of slapping on the headphones and the eye mask, jacking into a Frank's box, and then...
Jacking into a Frank's box.
Do you want me to say it differently?
I put my headphones on. And
Yeah, you're plugged in. You're jacking in. I'm not saying jacking off. You're jacking in.
To the Frank's box.
Jacking in is different than jacking off.
How about tapping in?
Tapping in.
All right.
All right.
Jacking into a Frank's box.
So that's ritual magic. That's a different thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Dana's usually, much to her dismay, the one who gets to channel these things.
Yeah.
And when she's doing the Estes method, if you've seen Hellier, you know all about it. She can't see or hear us, but we'll be, like Connor or I or Carl, whoever, will be sitting there talking to the ultraterrestrials or whatever they are, and Dana's just listening to what she can hear on the box and repeating it. It's very hard because Dana and I do a lot of events where we're leading ghost hunts. So the people who have purchased tickets to these events, they're there because they want to talk to like the ghost of a Victorian child, like a typical ghost.
Kind of weird, but
Sure, but it's it's ghost hunting. The issue is we've almost retuned our brains now.
Yeah, I can't. I honestly can't do this anymore and listen and hear ghosts. I can't. It's just weird alien shit all the time, constantly.
You're tuned in.
It's very creepy to me because the phrase your time cycle or your time, I had never read that prior to having a few Estes method sessions and actually repeating that sentence before I even realized that it was something that came up in Keel's work as much as it does.
All the time.
Which is very creepy and scary because, again, the idea is I'm just hearing these words come out of a radio. So, like, the fact that it's very, very creepy. But as you said, at this point, my brain is only tuned to the ultraterrestrials. I can't talk to ghosts anymore.
It's almost, I mean, it's like your telephone, like if you walk into a room and you're ghost hunting and you pick up one end of a telephone and you're trying to really specifically reach out to another number, that's kind of what old-fashioned ghost hunting is.
Yeah.
But you get to a point where it's not that that's necessarily boring, it's just that you realize that might not be exactly what's happening. And so you start to widen your own perspective around it. And then before you know it, you're picking up that end of your receiver and you're hearing every phone call that's going on in a 5-mile radius. And it's like, what's going on?
Yeah.
That's a good way of
And
putting
that's when
it.
the aliens start coming through. And then they just,
the
they just don't stop.
They don't stop.
And that's
And
when the aliens start coming through.
We sound insane.
We definitely
I
do.
know this. I realize if you're someone who's not familiar with our work and you've just decided to listen to this episode of the podcast.
I listen to the radio and talk to ultraterrestrials once, almost a week.
Well, listen, you should see the look on someone's face when like a Midwestern dad has brought his like wife and kids to come talk to ghosts with people they've seen on TV at an event. And they're going around. The way they do these is there's different television ghost hunters in different parts of the haunted location, and they rotate them around like every hour. So you get to investigate with all these people. Well, they get to Dana and I, and we're like in a room. Dana's got the headphones and the eye mask on, and she's just like rattling stuff off, and we're asking questions. And if there's a lull, I know I should do this, but I do. I look at whoever looks like the most confused about what's going on, and I go, "Hey, you want to see some shit?" And they're like, "Yeah." And I go, "Watch this." And I look over at Dana and I go, "What is your time cycle?" And all of a sudden, the ultra-terrestrials get tweaked, and Dana starts going, "The weather on Mars is dry today." And she's like doing shit like, "Mission Control says that they will see you in time."
No.
And these guys are like the one that happened like 2 weeks ago. There's this guy who's sitting there, and I could tell that he's just like trying to figure out what's going on because our session's so much different than everybody else's. And I look at him and I go, "Hey, what's something you've always wanted to ask an alien?" And he goes, "What do you eat?" And then you start going, out of Dana's mouth starts happening, "We devour the souls of the living in order to power our bodies."
Oh my God.
And you start going on about like, "The time only flows forward. You need to contact us at a better time."
Just for reference, so that people understand, I can't hear anything that's happening outside of the headphones. So Greg, it could be asking me anything. I'm just repeating what I'm hearing, all right? Just want that on record.
And it's
so
funny.
People don't think I'm talking about devouring children. And
It's a trigger.
I'm gonna get on a.
It's a trigger.
It's an audible trigger.
Yes.
Asking, like, here's the thing.
Flipping a switch.
If you guys at home are investigators and you are into the stuff that we're into and you use the Estes method, go ahead, start asking them what is your time cycle and then watch what happens. They go nuts. There's just something strange about the ultra-terrestrials in time, which is why... That's why Indrid Cold is always saying, "I'll see you in time," and it probably has an alternative meaning than the one you think. There you go. That's the trouble. Try and adapt that for a modern audience.
Yeah.
I see it when we're at events trying to talk, to ghosts, and people wonder what the heck they're seeing.
I mean, Hellier is like such a great example of this too,
Sure.
because, most of the negative feedback that we would get from people are people who don't understand what high strangeness really is, and understand even more that trying to document it in an entertaining way sometimes does not flow in a linear fashion.
Right.
It's kind of a little bit all over the place. So Mothman Prophecies, the film, did, I think, a very fair job of dictating what that experience is like in a way that had a beginning, middle, and end.
Well, despite all of the hard work that went into trying to make this palatable for normal people, it didn't really do so well in the reviews.
Yes.
I think it had, you asked us earlier what we thought it would do on IMDb. We said 7.5 probably. Personal. I think it has a 6 something, 6.4 on IMDb.
Yeah, 6.4 on IMDb. What is it? 52% Rotten Tomatoes critics, 54% audience.
I think it just confused
56.
people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think people had a hard time figuring out what they were supposed to get out of this film.
They were probably, like you said, they were probably confused. They were probably just like, this is creepy and weird, and I kind of think I know what's going on, but I don't really know what's going on. Because they're also, the other thing that's kind of good to point out is they really don't hold your hand through this movie a lot. Like, you kind of have to figure it out. And the thing is, we obviously have read these books so many times, and we're very familiar with the content, that we know exactly what's happening.
Sure.
But if you were someone who was just like, I just want to watch
I
want to
watch Richard Gere.
Yeah, I love Richard Gere. And suddenly there's like a man named Indrid Cold, and they're talking about a muscular Mothman. And like, it would be you'd be like, is this about aliens?
But this is the weird thing. At the time period, Richard Gere was doing romantic comedies.
Yeah.
Like, he was doing romantic films. It had Deborah Messing in it at the beginning, playing his wife. Laura Linney's in it. So like, any person is going to be like, oh, it's a Richard Gere movie. I can't wait to go see it.
Yeah.
And then they get this really strange film
Yeah.
that there's no real solid answer to like what's going on. You never see the monster. You got this guy Indrid Cold in there who's calling people on the phone. People's eyes are bleeding and shit.
Yeah, it's a lot. It's I can see how the average horror fan or the average moviegoer who's like, I love Richard Gere.
It's not extreme enough for the horror fan.
It's too weird for the average fan of like drama or crime. Like, it's too weird for someone to figure out. So like, I get it. And I can imagine that most people watched it and were like, what the fuck did I just watch? Like, they probably didn't know what was happening.
It also came out at like one of the worst times you could release a movie.
There is that also.
It came out up against like, what were the movies that it was up against? Black Hawk Down.
Yeah, Harry Potter.
Ocean's 11.
Lord of the Rings.
Monsters, Inc.
Yeah, like, you were doomed. You didn't have a chance. You just didn't have a chance.
That's a tough time to be in the theater.
Uh-huh.
I think I actively I feel like we've uncovered a memory here that I remember walking past the Mothman Prophecies poster to go see Harry Potter. The first Harry Potter.
How old would you have been? You would have been young.
3rd or 4th grade. Yeah.
Oh my
Can you
God.
imagine
So-
3rd or 4th grade Connor going to see Mothman Prophecies?
But there's like, I remember the Rorschach tests.
Yeah, right.
They kind of had there was a certain look to the poster.
Well, you know what's funny?
Eerie. It is eerie, but definitely would have rather seen Harry Potter.
Sure, I agree. I get it. I was still scared after I saw it. I was terrified. My friends and I were scared for weeks. We were so scared of the Mothman.
It's creepy. It's a creepy movie. It's got a vibe. It makes you feel weird.
Despite the tough time that it came out, despite a lot of the reviews weren't terribly nice to it.
No.
It was not a commercial failure.
No, it did kind of good.
Made, I think, $20 million at the box office. That's not bad.
When you consider that it's a movie about what it's about, the fact that it made its money back and more is pretty incredible. And like, to this day, you know, it's a movie that's like still on rotation for a lot of people.
For sure. Yeah.
So is Harry Potter.
So, I mean,
That's fair.
But
Oh, God.
yeah, it's I feel like I remember that, and a really difficult time to release a movie for sure. There were some very clear differences
Yes.
between the movie and the book.
Yes.
And I feel like if it came out in theaters now,
Right.
I wonder if I would be a hater.
you probably would be a
for
hater.
sure.
Yeah.
I think I'd probably be a hater.
Just
hater
reading
too.
it all and
Yeah.
being like, that's not what Keel is like. And
Yeah.
there's clear character differences, which is kind of fun to talk about.
So much so that they split him into two characters.
They did. You have like young Keel and old Keel.
Yeah. They have Richard Gere's version of John Keel, who's very like straight-laced, who works at the Washington Post. He's
Very
got
successful.
a wife. Yep. He's not never an inkling of him being in that strange stuff. They even say, like, they make fun of him. They're like, this is the type of stuff you'd make fun of when it come across the wire. And he's still, he's out there investigating it by accident. That's
Yeah.
the other thing.
That is a weird detail that like happens and then doesn't get any kind of fleshing out, which is Richard Gere's character, again, who's supposed to be John Keel. His name is John Klein in the movie, is driving somewhere. We don't really know. And then he manages to wind up in Point Pleasant accidentally, so
Right.
not on purpose.
Grieving his dead wife.
Yes.
Who didn't exist in real life.
Who did not exist in real life.
Don't imagine he was much of a ladies' man.
No. Not with those descriptions.
No. So what they did is they split him into two characters, and at a point, once he's like, I've got to figure out what this thing is.
Yeah.
He goes to visit this guy that he apparently knew about already, who wrote weirdo books like Keel does.
Yeah.
And the guy's name was Alexander Leek
Yeah.
Keel backwards.
Oh, I didn't even think about that.
Richard Hayden put a lot of really cool little Easter eggs in here that way.
There are a lot of Easter eggs in the script still. When you listen to it, there's a lot of bits and pieces from like Operation Trojan Horse and like little bits and pieces make it into the script.
I'll give him credit that like two of my favorite parts of Mothman Prophecies, the book, are in the movie in some form, which is number one, the bizarre Indrid contact and some of the things that he says, even over phone calls and stuff like that, that sort of contact information. And then the other thing is the whole opening of the Mothman Prophecies book, which is when John Keel, his car breaks down on his way to Point Pleasant, and he has to go up to this old West Virginia farmhouse, and these people are very suspicious of him.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And he takes away, sort of turns it into this allegory of, to them, I'm a man in black.
Yes. Which is great.
Which is cool.
Yeah.
In the movie, of course, he's like, it turns into a much more dramatic depiction of it, but it's there, and it's a very cool way to work a few things in.
The Alexander Leek character, pretty spot on for Keel.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't imagine he would have been spotted at a church. I don't
No,
think
he
Keel
was
was very
leaving a
religious.
church.
But he did a really, really excellent job with that part. I would have watched that guy do the whole movie.
Sure.
He was awesome. The thing that bothered me about the movie, like one of the biggest differences in the movie, is there are no UFOs.
There's no UFOs. It's weird.
The UFOs are the biggest part of the Mothman Prophecies.
Yeah.
Mothman is like 20% of it. The UFOs are like the 80%.
Yeah.
There's no Men in Black.
There's no Men in Black. But you have to remember, when did the Men in Black movie come out?
Oh, was that like 97?
It was in the 90s, so it was like not
were
in
they
the
nervous about that?
They were
maybe?
like, this is an already established thing, and if we bring it into this movie, people are going to be like, I thought that they were like Will Smith.
I thought they were the good guys.
Yeah, like yeah, exactly.
Oh, that's a good point.
I was thinking about it the whole time because I was like, there are no Men in Black in this movie. And then I was like, oh, wait, like 2 years before the Men in Black movie came out. And they probably were like, we can't deal with this in this movie. So we miss out on UFOs and we miss out on Men in Black, which is a bummer because the Men in Black are the scariest on the planet, especially in Mothman Prophecies. They creep me the out.
Yeah.
Real life Men in Black are not like Will Smith.
No.
They are named Vadig, and they show up at your door asking census questions and then knowing things that they shouldn't know.
And not knowing how to use utensils.
They can't eat Jell-O. They can't drink water.
And their hands look weird.
Yeah.
And they, like nervously shift away.
They're so creepy. The details are so creepy. Again,
they still could have done it. There's a way that they could have incorporated it.
I don't. You know what? You saying that makes me think they could have included it and just not called the Men in Black.
Exactly.
They could have given it another name.
Right.
Because they had a name for the TNT domes area. They called it like the
the Zone of Fear.
Yeah, the Zone of Fear.
Yeah.
Which is kind of awesome.
I kind of love that. I think they kind of make Indrid Cold act as a man in black. They sort of show him as an outline of a man who's like kind of got a weird hunch. And, calling on the phone, doing the same stuff that the Men in Black did to John Keel during the actual case, calling him up, telling him things that were going to happen.
So the other thing that's really interesting is the closest that we get to a prophecy, since we are talking about Mothman Prophecies, is that Mary Hyre, the initial journalist, has a dream, and in her dream, she sees presents floating across the water, and she sees them in the water. And it's also reflected in the movie with Laura Linney's character, who has a monologue where she talks about being in the water and noticing and seeing presents floating in the water. So again, that's about as close as we get to that.
Right. In real life, John Keel didn't get a message that the bridge was going to collapse. He got a message from the Men in Black that said that when the president lights the Christmas tree, the national tree, there will be a nationwide blackout.
Mm-hmm.
So John Keel was sitting around waiting for this to happen. Like, he was watching the television. He sees the tree get lit, and then he's like, well, nothing happened. But then the news wire comes across and says there's been a bridge collapse, and it was the Point Pleasant Bridge, the Silver Bridge.
There's really only those two prophecies in the book. They make that whole Gordon Smallwood character start to foresee like tragedies across the world and things like that, which didn't really happen.
Gordon Smallwood was supposed to be Woodrow Derenberger.
Yeah.
Yes. He was supposed to be the Woodrow Derenberger Indrid Cold contactee character.
Yeah, there's a few things, we noticed at the end of the movie there, right as the bridge is collapsing, and it's a really dramatic scene. It's really intense. You realize that the two lights at the very top of the bridge are actually two bright red lights. And it almost seems like all of the red lights that are, again, supposed to be Mothman's glowing eyes were a bit of foreshadowing for this giant bridge collapse, as if like that's a representation of what we've actually been seeing throughout the whole movie. And I thought that was really cool. Like, I thought that was cool. Interesting.
Well, Mark Pellington, the director, he gave an interview once where he said he kind of wanted people to wonder whether a lot of the stuff that was happening was in the John Keel character's head.
Yeah, yeah.
So I think that's probably why we got the Rorschach test posters.
It's cool.
Like, is this guy going crazy? What is he experiencing? Which is neat. I just don't think that was really explored as far as it should have been if that was really the case.
Yeah, it definitely leaves it kind of confused. You're a bit confused because you kind of are going like, so wait, the Mothman wasn't real? Like they're just seeing this bridge? Right. And maybe that was their way also of being able to kind of avoid fleshing out some of the middle high strangeness parts where it's like, now it was all supposed to be the bridge's eyes. The bridge is the eyes and that's it,
The bridge scene was probably the most technical scene in the whole movie. Like that had to have cost tons of money, tons of time.
Yeah.
I mean, you see how big this model car is from that bridge scene. Imagine how big that bridge had to be.
Dude, you know what the crazy thing about it is too? Think about how good that scene still looks.
It looks great.
Considering that 2001 and 2002 were the time period of like the worst CG in history, that scene, had it been done in CG, would have been a mess. It looks so good. Everything is... You're like right in the moment. It's like a terrifying scene. I can imagine that like for anyone who actually went through that experience, watching that scene was probably very traumatizing for them because it's so intense.
It was. I mean, it looks great. The fact that they went practical for it.
Yeah,
they
genius.
built a 1/6 scale silver bridge. Like
that explains this.
Yeah, dude. There were dozens of cars on that bridge that were this size.
The trunk doesn't open.
No. This it looks good on camera.
Yeah.
We watched it and we were trying to figure out what car we were pausing it, and I think we found the car.
Yeah.
The shots of the bridge that they matched the miniatures with was shot on a bridge in Pennsylvania. Mm-hmm. It's another thing. They didn't shoot this in Point Pleasant, West Virginia.
Yeah.
I'm sure it was probably difficult. Point Pleasant's not really easy to get to.
No.
As they say in the movie, it's not on the way to anything.
Yes.
Yeah, it's true. There is probably not enough hotels to house an entire crew of Hollywood people, and just the place that they chose looks so much like Point Pleasant.
It does.
It's weird. Like it has that little parking, like it looks exactly like Point Pleasant.
When they were shooting on the bridge, they had 140 cars on it.
140 of these?
No, full size.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
So that means they probably had a ton of these too.
Mm-hmm.
But when they were shooting on the actual bridge in Pennsylvania, they had 140 cars that just sat there and idled for hours and hours and hours and hours. It was a humongous ordeal.
Yeah.
Giant production.
Mm-hmm. It's incredible. Like I cannot stress it enough how much it lives up to.
They pulled it off.
Yeah, they definitely did.
Incredible. Like you said, it's probably traumatic for people who remember the
I bet
bridge
it
collapse.
is, especially for like, maybe not people who were alive at that point in time, but maybe people who lost like grandparents or like, you know what I mean? Like that, it was a very intense scene.
Do you remember that slate at the very end of the movie too?
Yeah.
They say, "We don't know."
Uh-huh.
And it was the true cause of the bridge collapse was never found.
Yeah.
That's not true.
That's not true.
Yeah.
This episode is brought to you by the Newkirk Museum of the Paranormal Membership Program. Become a museum member and take part in live paranormal investigations. Receive Dana's Magic of the Month subscription box, access in-depth artifact case files, and gain access to hundreds of hours of exclusive content available only to members. To become a member, visit patreon.com/paramuseum.
Again, this thing became a humongous national news story that changed bridge safety. It changed how bridges were constructed. It changed how we inspect them, how often we inspect them. They know how the bridge collapsed.
Yeah.
These suspension bridges are created in a very specific way, and they're made with these I-beams that sort of they connect to one another.
They're almost like joints when you think about it.
Exactly.
They sort of move with the weight of the bridge and the movement on the bridge, and it gives the bridge the ability to move a little bit, so it's not staying in one space and getting, obviously the wind would blow it over.
The company who made these bridges was based out of Pennsylvania, and they had made a few of these in PA, and they were incredibly solid. They had a new kind of steel that was supposed to be a lot stronger than the steel they were using before. So when it came time to build this bridge in Point Pleasant, they said, well, we don't need as many of these I-beam connections.
They were wrong.
Yeah.
They were way wrong.
They just thought the steel was going to work.
What kind of steel did they think it was?
A superhuman steel.
Adamantium?
Adamantium. Dana's trying to be a nerd, but...
The steel that
Wolverine has in his bones?
That
Adamantium?
steel?
Yeah.
Yeah.
They probably thought it was close.
Adamantium?
Well, they decided this is stronger steel, so we don't need as many of these I-beam connections.
Turns out they did.
So they only had 2 of them, I think, on the
two.
Point Pleasant Bridge on either side.
Yeah, they thought it looked a little bit sleeker.
Yeah.
There's a really good video that's kind of like a school museum video, but we'll link to it to watch so you can really see like how it structurally happened.
Yeah, and you can see video of it not too long after it happened. It's incredible to see. They said the bridge came down in 1 minute.
Oh, it was
bridge.
super fast. It's why so many people died.
Mm-hmm.
There was no chance really to get off the bridge.
Yeah.
You had to be extremely lucky.
Yeah.
So the way that these things go together is there's a bunch of these I-beams that slide together, and then a bolt goes through them.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a really difficult process to push this bolt through.
Yeah, and they're sort of thinking that one of the bars took on more stress when it was being actually put into place, and it was sort of the downfall for this specific 330 bar. So
bolt 330 is the bolt that failed, and this bolt, whatever defect it had, allowed water to pool underneath of it when it went through the I-beam. And that water got to sit there for 35 years, rusting away at the metal,
corroding it,
and creating a fissure, creating a little bit of a crack.
Yeah.
This night was the perfect storm because it was extremely cold on the bridge. It was Christmas traffic, so traffic would load up. There would be a red light at the end. Traffic would be all loaded on top of this thing. And because it was so cold, it cracked.
Mm-hmm.
And that crack immediately threw one of the I-beams off, and then it was off balance, and it just twisted that bolt until it snapped, and then the whole thing came down like dominoes.
Yeah, it was literally a house of cards at that point. There's one woman who was in her car, and she was on the opposite side. She was on the Ohio side, and she saw the bridge starting to collapse and sort of fly up in the air, and she threw her car into reverse and backed off the bridge. And in the time that she made it off, the entire bridge just collapsed in front of her. So she literally, like, her instincts kicked in, and she just hit reverse and managed. Her car was right on the line,
right on the edge of where it
and
fell.
she just watched the whole thing happen in front of her. It must have been absolutely horrendous.
Yeah.
And another thing, too, that we learned is that, like, the way bridges are tested is by number. So they're a 2 would be they're expected to carry twice the load. The Silver Bridge was a 1.5 in the late 1920s.
Yeah.
Oh, right.
And so, like, we're driving around these little Model T cars.
Yeah.
And now you've got semis, and you've got huge sedans up there.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not... It's a lot more weight than it was initially probably designed, combined with this I-beam. The video's kind of scary.
Yeah, we'll link the video in the comments, and you can see this interview Dana was talking about with the woman who survived it miraculously and actually watched the whole thing collapse. I think the scary thing to me is her saying, I watched it happen in front of me. It just, everything came down like dominoes, but I just didn't know what to do. I didn't really know how to react because it happened so quickly.
Yeah.
So a lot of people want to blame the Silver Bridge collapse on Mothman.
Yeah.
But unless Mothman was like rusting one of those I-beams for 35 years, probably not what happened.
Leave Mothman alone.
Leave Mothman alone.
Mothman is a good guy. Connor doesn't think so. That's okay.
So this is the question. That's right. Connor is not a fan of Mothman
Connor's
after
got
this
a big
episode.
suspicion.
This the dog stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is the question then. How was Mothman connected to this bridge? How was Indrid Cold connected to the Mothman case? Did they have anything to do with it? Were they trying to warn people? Did this strange force destroy the bridge? What happened? What do you think happened?
It's such a hard answer to give because my opinion about it will change constantly. And there's part of me that thinks that something very strange was going on and something very strange was about to happen. And maybe there was a sense of like a massive group of people in a very small community were about to go through something very traumatizing and very horrible. And maybe there's something about that tends to bring in strangeness. Maybe what we're experiencing is that psychic impression of the bridge collapsing, rippling in all directions, future and past, right?
Right.
And maybe that's why we have these moments where it seems as if a flap happens. I don't have an answer, and I think that's the thing. My thoughts are really kind of muddled and changing all the time. And I think that every time you read Mothman Prophecies, you probably might come to a different conclusion. But there's, to me, a sense of all of this strangeness happening, I think, because we're looking at a very, small community of people who are all touched at this point by this horrible experience that happens. So all of this strangeness is rippling around them and happening around them in a forward and in a past and future kind of way. That's where I'm at right now. What do you think?
Barker and Keel both thought that it was connected, that Mothman was connected to the bridge collapse. There's a lot of people who believe that today. There's plenty of documentaries. We were actually laughing when we were going through to watch Mothman the other day because there's so many movies about Mothman now.
Yeah.
Most of them think that it's connected somehow to the bridge collapse. Some of them believe that Mothman caused it. I think that Barker and Keel believed that Mothman was sort of a premonition that something terrible was going to happen.
Like a harbinger of doom.
A harbinger of doom is what you see. Even the movie, when he talks to Alexander Leek takes him to the library and shows him all of these things. The Great Garuda, the entities are seen, the Mothmen are seen before giant disasters. My take on it is, because these entities seem so obsessed with time, they're always wondering, what is your time cycle? They're asking that question. They're discussing, your time moves forward, ours is different. Indrid Cold, I'll see you in time. I think that it's not that they're there as a premonition. It's not that they're there to cause these types of things. I think that the appearance of these entities in these high strangeness flaps might be a side effect of a tragedy that affects the psyche of an entire place. So like that ripples.
Yeah.
If you look at the Global Consciousness Project, where they are measuring the statistical probability of chance all the time, all over the world, they are able to map out that the chance changes in times of tragedy. They've done it after 9/11. They do it after popular figures died. They did it after the Queen died.
Weird.
And you can actually see an actual change in the statistical probability of chance in random number generators around massive tragedies.
Do they know why?
That's what they're trying to figure out. They have no clue.
Okay.
But it's almost as if what happens in these moments is there's a psychic ripple. And you can even map it to like people starting to get tweaked an hour before a tragedy happens.
Yeah.
That probably works on a bigger, larger scale if you believe in that type of thing. So what if The Silver Bridge that killed 44 people and changed the way we build bridges
Yeah, safety just in general.
forever was in the news. It was huge. People from all kinds of different states, the federal government came out to investigate this thing. What if it created such a big, massive, important psychic ripple in time that all of these things started to kind of emanate around it, backwards and forwards? And that's why these things show up. It's not, again, it's not necessarily that they're a premonition. They're a symptom. They're a side effect of something's big and terrible happening.
See you in time.
See you in time.
Yeah.
What about you, Connor? What do you think?
I think that if you boil down the story to, okay, what's the Mothman, what's the prophecy that we're referencing here?
Mhm.
The most strong case one is Mary Hyer's dream of presence in the water.
Yeah.
Right.
Now, she was the newspaper reporter of the vast majority of all of these reports, and she was the person that was in firsthand interviews with Keel for 13 months about what was going on.
Right.
Her headspace was so much in the high strangeness headspace. I don't think that Mothman or anybody else could have, besides a structural engineer, could have predicted the bridge disaster or
Right.
that Mothman caused it. Personally, I think that Mary Hyre was just, there's two things. It's either an odd coincidence or she was so in tune because of everything that she was hearing and experiencing constantly that she somehow made that little leap into that upper consciousness.
Yeah.
In a brief moment of clarity, saw those presents in the water, in the confusion of whether time is linear or what's going on with
Yeah.
that I think that Mary could have actually been tapped into something
Yeah.
Sure.
very briefly. I don't think that the disaster itself is in any way connected to the phenomena, personally. I also don't think that Indrid is connected to Mothman necessarily,
I agree with you.
but I will say, like, that's not what Terry Wrist says, not to
Yeah.
make it about our show.
That's true.
When he's like, oh, no, that was a call out. He's the one who caused
Oh, that's
Mothman.
true. You should tell people who aren't familiar with Hellier what Terry, this weird guy, this enigmatic figure in the back of a book that Alan Greenfield wrote. Alan Greenfield, again, wrote the intro to Silver Bridge in 1970. Alan Greenfield interviewed a strange man numerous times who claimed to have been in contact with Indrid Cold many years after the Silver Bridge incident.
Yeah, he claimed to be in contact with Indrid Cold basically in the 80s, and he said that he, shorthand, basically got information that the whole Mothman flap, which is the UFOs and the creature sightings, was simply caused by Indrid Cold because he wanted newspaper agencies to be reporting his name, because his name is actually a code word to the other aliens that are out there that could potentially rescue him, right? And so he wanted that odd name to be published and needed a way for it to be published. And that is something that he could personally open up that portal to high strangeness in the area that he was hiding.
All right, well, let me throw this at you. If we're talking about Hellier now, so as I said, my theory is something big that impacted the cultural psyche happened and things emanated out of that, and that may have caused the high strangeness to happen. So what if we mix a bit of what I think and what you think? You had a premonition in season 1 of Hellier of a tin can. It's easy to joke about it. It's easy to laugh about it, but it affected you. And would you argue that when you found that tin can, maybe it's not the discovery of the tin can, but where we found it, that being in that tunnel and the stuff that happened at the end of that first season changed the course of your life?
Yeah, it did.
That would cause a psychic ripple to me, and maybe the easiest thing to latch onto was the tin can. So maybe it's the same thing as Mary Hyre seeing the packages floating in the water. No real context for it, but because something so big and impactful was going to happen to her and her town, she got a glimpse of it because of the psychic ripple. I don't know.
Compounded by that is the fact that Mothman basically disappeared after the bridge collapsed.
Yeah.
True.
Totally gone.
Focus was not there,
Yeah.
and whatever vibe needed to be occurring for all the people who were searching for him, just like people who go ghost hunting, people who want to see the ghosts,
Right.
maybe can create them.
Sure.
Was gone.
Yeah. They were focused on something very different at that point in time, and the strangeness seemed to stop.
My argument for Mothman not being a bad thing is the fact that Mothman has been embraced by the town that it tormented. These people, I know that a lot of them didn't like it, but I would argue that Mothman has put Point Pleasant on the map again.
Yeah.
In a good way.
Yeah.
It was an old mining town. It was very depressed. And some of the people who were directly affected by the Mothman case, by the Silver Bridge collapse, they started to embrace the lore around Mothman. They built a Mothman museum after they started building the Mothman Festival. Hundreds of thousands of people have visited the Mothman Festival now.
The Mothman Festival is so great, too, because it's sort of a celebration of, like, local art and spookiness and folklore and paranormal stuff, and it's just a little bit of everything. That it feels, the thing about Mothman, and I've always thought about Mothman, Mothman is cool.
Yeah.
Mothman is a cool being. And I feel like when you look at the things that have emanated from Mothman, whether they're like video games or, communities of people, whatever it is, Mothman creates a lot of positivity. And that's kind of a cool thing.
Probably a big reason why Mothman has become a queer icon.
Yeah, Mothman is out there.
Mothman has been co-opted by the LGBTQ plus community, much the same way that the Babadook was. And now you see all kinds of rainbow flag art featuring Mothman. It's probably because it's misunderstood. And it's easy to rally behind the Mothman because the town has embraced it. And if you feel like you're misunderstood, you can embrace it. And Mothman doesn't become this evil thing that hovers around town waiting to cause disaster. It becomes a protector of the town, a protector of things that maybe are misunderstood and people that are misunderstood. Mothman's beautiful.
Mothman is beautiful. Mothman's awesome. Again, creating beautiful art, bringing people together, getting people interested in folklore and in high strangeness and weirdness just in general. We have like such a great example of why Mothman is a good thing. Why Mothman is a great example for why towns should embrace their monsters.
Yes.
Bring your monsters back.
Man, I think if more towns embrace their monsters the way that Point Pleasant did, you'd be getting a lot more tourism.
Yeah.
And I think that you would find that sometimes the things that frighten us are not really so scary when you get to know them. Unless, maybe they're stealing our dogs. We don't know.
Maybe they're stealing our dogs, and maybe they exist in a toxic waste dump
That's also
that you
true.
should not go to, because that TNT area is still classified by the EPA as a really bad place.
Yeah, it's definitely, it's a bit dirty. It's a bit creepy.
People probably don't know this. That is literally a Superfund site.
I don't know what that means.
The TNT Domes area is a Superfund site. The federal government literally calls the swamp the toxic swamp, and it's not
gross.
cleaned up yet. And it's because of the old munitions stations that were there.
Yeah.
They used to store stuff, but the water's poison. You know what? I think one of the earlier theories about what Mothman was that's so ridiculous is like a crane that was swimming around in toxic sludge.
Yeah, that's a pretty big theory. I mean,
The skeptics were trying to make it a Ninja Turtle.
Yeah, like it fell in the ooze and it started a new kung fu and it could talk.
Exactly. Except this one just gave you premonitions and then made your eyes bleed.
Yeah, it stared at you like this.
And then
a field.
ran at you like a crippled chicken.
Yeah. Or then shot up in the air like an airplane.
Or a video game glitch.
Yeah, like just completely gone. I mean, in an argument against the crane, Greg and I were out at the domes one day, and it was during the day.
We go to Point Pleasant a lot.
We definitely go to Point Pleasant a lot. We were out there, and we did see some cranes, and they are large, and they're very creepy, but their bodies are very thin. They're very loud.
They don't got those big honking legs like
No.
everybody said they did.
They
The
don't.
Mothman does.
They don't have juicy donks. They don't
They
have rippling muscles. They're skinny little birds. Well, they're not little, but they're skinny birds with huge wingspans. And they just don't look anything like the description unless you're counting a huge wingspan, which, again, Mothman really never had. They never
No.
described like a 40-foot long wingspan or anything like that. So my vote is no on the Sandhill crane.
Yeah, I don't buy that either.
No.
But, John Keel's ears were bleeding when he was in Point Pleasant. Maybe he was hanging out near the toxic swamp
waste.
a little too long. Maybe
Did he
they're
get in that water?
breathing stuff in. You never know. It's too bad because I want to go go see the domes. If you're ever in Point Pleasant, you should go see the domes.
Maybe wear a mask
We do.
or something. I don't know. Maybe I'm going to start wearing a mask. I didn't realize it was
I don't know.
Great.
I guess we're not going to open a tourist agency in Point Pleasant. I had this great idea. My sister does a good Mothman impression.
Wait, what?
Wait, what is
It's
a
like-
Mothman impression?
She just imagines getting a really big costume and like driving people out in a van in the TNT domes, but she can't really see through the eyes of the costume. Then you're just like driving out there and you're like, and now, but you can't hear what she's saying either. So it's like, oh no. But she's like
She's doing a
walking
tour.
through there. Yeah. And is trying to. And then she tries to fit out the bus, but the wings don't fit out the doors of the tourist bus. So you're like, excuse me. And then somebody has to push her through.
Like, foom.
Dude, people would never
falls
forget that
through.
tour.
It would be incredible.
It'd be great.
Yeah.
Michelle's Mothman tour.
Love it. This is the thing about high strangeness. There is no real solution. There is no real answer.
No.
They talk about it in the book. They talk about it in the Mothman Prophecies movie. We can't know. Their motivations are not human. So we will not really understand them. We're trying to put puzzle pieces together when maybe we just can't. Who knows what Mothman is? Mothman could have been a bunch of different things that all just coalesced at the perfect time. We all have our theories on what we think happened in Point Pleasant. I know that Point Pleasant still feels kind of strange. You go there now and you can still feel what feels like those lingering ripples of not just the tragedy, but of the strange sighting of this monster that was in this town scaring people for over a year. You can go to Point Pleasant and you can walk in the footsteps of John Keel and Gray Barker and all of these different people who had these experiences. You can even still meet and talk to some of the people who've had these experiences. A lot of them will show up at the Mothman Festival. You can go there and still experience some of the ripples of what it was that happened there. We'll never know for sure. We can just look for different ripples. We can look for other flaps that happen in different places. To me, this car is representative of the best attempt that has ever been made to show high strangeness to a mass audience. It's difficult. We know how difficult it is. When we are making Hellier, we're making something that's really for us and people like us. So when people go, well, I don't understand it. You saw a tin can and there's a balloon and there's no goblins and you're talking about synchronicities. That's what it's like. It feels like a disconnected mess of all kinds of weird stuff that is very deeply impactful on the people who go through it and experience it. It is very, very hard to put on a screen and have it be entertaining for people. This car represents the best attempt that has ever been made to put John Keel's ideas on screen, which is why, to me, this car is a haunted object.
The Haunted Objects podcast is hosted by Greg and Dana Newkirk, produced by Connor J. Randall, with photography directed by Carl Pfeiffer, and features exclusive artifacts from the Newkirk Museum of the Paranormal. To learn more about the artifacts featured in this episode, take part in live interactive experiments, and enjoy exclusive Haunted Objects content, become a museum member at patreon.com/paramuseum. This has been a Planet Weird production.
My parents are divorced, and one time I had to spend Christmas at my dad's house, and when we woke up in the morning, my dad said that Santa was coming late that day because he was hungover.
No.
That actually happened to me. We were like, wait, you can come late? What the we just believed it. We believed it. He was like, yeah, you got to go upstairs for like 45 minutes.
Yeah, Santa's hungover,
I'm
kids.
not even, that's a real story.